The town was small, quiet, and deeply rooted in routine. Every Sunday morning the same bells rang, the same doors opened, and the same faces filled the wooden benches of the old church at the center of town. For years this church had been seen as a place of guidance and safety. People believed its words without question. What the leader said was treated as truth, and what they judged was accepted as right or wrong. She had grown up in this town. As a child, she sat on those same benches with her head bowed, listening carefully, trying to be good, trying to belong. Her family was not rich, not powerful, but they were faithful. She learned early that the church was not just a building. It was the heart of the town. If the church accepted you, life was easier. If it turned its back on you, life became heavy. As she grew older, life did not go gently with her. Her parents passed away within a short time of each other, leaving her alone before she was ready. She worked hard, taking small jobs, saving every bit she could. She stayed quiet, kept her head down, and never caused trouble. People knew her as polite, simple, and respectful. No one ever imagined she would become a topic of whispers. The trouble began slowly, almost quietly. A misunderstanding at work turned into a rumor. Someone saw her talking to a married man in public, nothing more than a short conversation, but the story changed as it passed from one person to another. By the time it reached the church leaders, it had become something ugly. No one came to her to ask what really happened. No one listened. One Sunday, as she sat in the back row, she felt the air change. The sermon that day was different. The words were sharp. The tone was heavy. Without saying her name, the speaker talked about sin, about women who led others astray, about shame that needed to be corrected in front of everyone. Eyes slowly turned toward her. She felt her face burn. Her hands shook, but she stayed seated, hoping it would pass. It did not. After the service, 2 members of the church leadership asked her to stay behind. Their faces were cold, their voices calm but firm. They spoke as if the decision had already been made. They told her the church could not allow someone with such behavior to remain silent among them. They said public correction was necessary for the good of the community. She tried to explain. Her voice was soft, her words careful. She told them nothing improper had happened. She begged them to speak to the people involved, to check the truth. They did not listen. One of them looked at her with disappointment, not anger, which hurt even more the following week. Her life changed completely. During the Sunday gathering, she was called forward. Her legs felt weak as she stood. The room felt larger than ever, filled with quiet judgment. The leader spoke openly this time. He talked about her as an example. He spoke of moral failure, of falling away from the right path. He said the church could not support such behavior. She stood there, silent tears running down her face, while people she had known since childhood avoided her eyes. Some looked sorry. Others looked proud, as if justice was being served. No one stood up for her. Not one voice spoke her name with kindness. By the end of that day, she was no longer welcome. The news spread fast. In a small town, shame travels quicker than truth. By Monday, she lost her job. Her employer said customers were uncomfortable. Friends stopped answering her calls. Even neighbors who once greeted her warmly now crossed the street to avoid her. She stayed inside. Her small rented room most days, staring at the walls, replaying every moment in her mind. Wondering where she went wrong, the shame sat heavy on her chest. She felt dirty, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. That was the hardest part. Knowing the truth, but having no way to prove it. At night she cried quietly, so no one would hear. She prayed, not for revenge, but for understanding. She asked why a place that taught love could be so quick to destroy someone. Weeks passed. Her savings disappeared. Food became a worry. Rent became impossible. The town that once felt like home now felt like a prison made of judgment and silence. She realized staying would only break her further. One early morning, before the sun fully rose, she packed a small bag. There was not much to take. A few clothes, a photograph from childhood, and a worn notebook filled with thoughts she never shared with anyone. She left without telling anyone. No one came to stop her. The city was loud, crowded, and cold in a different way. No one judged her there, but no one cared either. She found temporary work, cleaning offices at night. The pay was low, but it kept her alive. During the day, she rested on a thin mattress in a shared room, listening to the sounds of strangers living their own difficult lives. Even in the city, the pain followed her. The words spoken in that church stayed in her mind. She questioned herself constantly. She felt unworthy of kindness. When people were nice to her, she wondered when it would turn into blame. Sometimes she passed large buildings with glass walls and guards at the doors. She would look up and think about how different lives could be. She never imagined that someone from that world would ever notice someone like her, yet deep inside, something still lived. A quiet strength. She did not give up. She continued working, continued moving forward, even when every step felt heavy. She refused to let the shame define her completely. Even though it tried, what she did not know was that her story was only beginning. The same shame that pushed her away from everything familiar was slowly leading her toward a path she could never have planned. A path where truth would matter, where power would be questioned, and where love would appear in the most unexpected form. For now, she was just another face in the city, carrying a past no one knew, surviving one day at a time. Unaware that the silence around her was about to be broken, life in the city followed a rhythm that never slowed down. Days blended into nights, and nights into days. She learned quickly that no one asked questions unless they needed something. That suited her. After everything she had been through, silence felt safer than attention. Her cleaning job started late in the evening. When most people were heading home, she was just beginning. She wiped desks that belonged to people she would never meet, emptied trash bins filled with half-written ideas, and polished floors that reflected bright lights and empty promises. Sometimes she wondered about the lives of the people who worked there. They seemed important, busy, and confident. She felt invisible among them, and in some ways, she was thankful for that. There was one building she cleaned twice a week that stood taller than the rest. Its glass walls stretched toward the sky, and the security was stricter than anywhere else. The guards barely looked at her, but she noticed everything. She noticed the way expensive cars lined up outside. She noticed how carefully dressed everyone was. It felt like another world. One evening, as she was mopping a hallway, she noticed someone sitting alone in a conference room. That was unusual at that hour. Most people were gone by then. The man sat quietly, staring at documents spread across the table. He looked tired, not angry or rushed, just deeply worn down. His jacket was off, his tie loose, and his shoulders slumped. She lowered her eyes and continued working, not wanting to disturb him. As she passed the glass door, he looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, expecting him to complain or ask her to hurry. Instead, he spoke softly. He asked if she needed water. The question caught her off guard. No one ever asked her that. She shook her head politely and kept moving. But the kindness lingered in the air, making her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. Kindness still felt dangerous to her. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed again and again. He often worked late, and she cleaned the same floor. Their interactions were small at first. A nod, a quiet greeting. Sometimes he asked how her night was going. She always answered briefly and returned to her work. She noticed things about him. He never raised his voice. He treated everyone the same, whether they were wearing suits or uniforms. When staff made mistakes, he corrected them calmly, instead of blaming them. This confused her. Power usually came with cruelty, at least in her experience. One night, she slipped on a wet floor she had just cleaned. It wasn't serious, but the sound echoed loudly in the hallway. Before she could even stand, he was there asking if she was hurt. His concern was genuine, not forced. She felt embarrassed, her face burning as she assured him she was fine. That night, for the first time, she spoke more than a few words. She thanked him. Her voice shook slightly, betraying how unused she was to being seen. After that, their conversations slowly grew longer. He never asked personal questions, never pushed. He spoke about work, about how running large businesses often felt lonelier than people imagined. She listened more than she spoke. Listening was something she had learned to do well. One evening, when the building was nearly empty, he asked her a simple question. He asked where she was from. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she considered lying. It would be easier. But something in his calm expression made her pause. She answered honestly, naming the small town she had left behind. He nodded, as if recognizing something in her tone. He didn't ask why she left. He didn't assume. That restraint made her feel safe. Days later, after a particularly long shift, he offered her a cup of tea from the office kitchen. She hesitated. Accepting anything felt like crossing a line. But she was exhausted, and her hands were shaking from the cold. She agreed. They sat. Across from each other at opposite ends of the long table, the distance felt respectful. He asked how long she had been working nights. She told him. He asked if she liked the city. She shrugged. She said it was loud but honest. No one pretended to be better than they were. Without planning to, she spoke about the church. The words came slowly at first, like she was testing the ground beneath her feet. She talked about how it had once been her whole world, how it promised safety but delivered judgment, how one rumor had been enough to erase her entire life. She did not cry. She had cried enough already. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly on the warm cup. He listened without interrupting. His face did not change. He did not defend the church or question her story. When she finished, there was a long silence. She worried she had said too much. Then he spoke. He said what happened to her was wrong. The simplicity of the sentence broke something inside her. No one had ever said that so clearly before. No excuses, no lessons. Just truth. She felt her throat tighten, but she held herself together. She thanked him and stood to leave, afraid that staying would expose her too much. He didn't stop her. He simply told her she was welcome to talk any time. After that night, something shifted. She walked a little straighter. The weight on her chest felt slightly lighter. Being believed, even by one person, made a difference she hadn't expected. She did not know then who he truly was. She knew he was important, but she didn't understand how powerful he actually was. To her, he was just someone who listened without judging. As weeks passed, he learned more about her struggles in quiet pieces. The lost job, the isolation, the nights she went to sleep hungry. He never offered money. He never made promises. Instead, he offered respect. That mattered more to her than anything else. What she didn't see was the way her story stayed with him long after she left each night. He thought about the confidence with which institutions could destroy someone. He thought about how easily truth could be buried. For the first time in years, his success felt hollow. Her story reminded him of something he had lost along the way. A sense of responsibility beyond profit, too. Broken worlds had crossed paths without either of them fully realizing it. She believed she had simply met a kind stranger during the darkest chapter of her life. He believed he had just listened to a woman who needed to be heard. Neither of them knew that this quiet connection was about to challenge powerful people, expose deep hypocrisy, and change both of their lives in ways that could not be undone. For now, they returned to their separate lives each night. She cleaned floors. He reviewed contracts. But something invisible connected them, growing stronger with every honest conversation, and slowly. The silence that once protected the truth began to crack. Time moved forward, but neither of them felt the same as before. Their conversations continued in small pieces, never rushed, never forced. Some nights they spoke only a few words. Other nights, silence said more than anything. She had begun to trust the quiet between them. She noticed changes in herself. She laughed once, softly, when he made a simple joke about office life. The sound surprised her. It had been a long time since laughter came naturally. She still carried pain, but it no longer felt like the only thing inside her. He noticed changes too. Found himself staying later than usual, not because of work, but because he didn't want to leave before she did. Her presence grounded him in a way expensive meetings and powerful deals never had. She reminded him of the human cost behind every decision people like him made. One night after she finished her work early, He asked if she wanted to sit for a few minutes. His tone was careful, respectful. She agreed. He asked her something he had been holding back for weeks. He asked if the church had ever given her anything in writing. Any warning? Any proof of their claims? She shook her head. She told him everything was spoken, never written. Words delivered from a raised platform, protected by authority and belief. She said they told her it was for her own good, for her soul. He leaned back in his chair, quiet for a long moment. His expression hardened slightly, not with anger, but with thought. He asked who the leaders were. She hesitated again. Speaking their roles felt like reopening wounds. But she answered in general terms. Elders. Speakers. A board that made decisions behind closed doors. He did not react immediately. He thanked her for trusting him with something so painful. That night, when she left, he remained seated long after the lights were dimmed. For the first time, he began to look deeper. He did not start with revenge. He started with questions, quiet ones. He asked his legal team about churches and accountability, about how religious organizations handled accusations, about how often rumors destroyed lives without evidence. What he learned disturbed him. There were protections in place, meant to preserve faith and freedom. But those same protections were often used to hide wrongdoing. Many cases never reached public view. Settlements were made quietly. People were silenced with shame. He asked for background reports on the town she came from. At first it seemed ordinary, but then patterns appeared. Complaints that went nowhere. People who left suddenly, stories whispered online and deleted just as fast. He didn't tell her any of this yet. He didn't want to give her false hope or reopen her wounds without purpose. Meanwhile, her life continued in its fragile balance. The cleaning job paid just enough. Some weeks were harder than others. There were days she skipped meals to save money. He noticed once when she looked faint and insisted she'd sit down. She tried to refuse, embarrassed, but he would not let pride harm her. Still, he never crossed boundaries. Never offered charity, never treated her like a project. That respect kept her dignity intact. One evening, something happened that shook her deeply. As she exited the building, she saw a familiar face across the street. Someone from her old town, someone who had once sat beside her in church. Their eyes met. The recognition was instant. Her chest tightened. Old fear rushed back. She turned quickly and walked away, her heart pounding. The city lights blurred through her tears. That night she barely slept. Memories flooded her mind, the whispers, the sermon, feeling of standing alone while everyone judged her. The next time she saw him, he noticed something was wrong immediately. Her usual calm was gone. Her hands shook as she worked. When he asked if she was okay, she broke down. The words spilled out faster than she could stop them. She told him about seeing someone from her past, about how she feared the story would follow her forever, about how shame had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. He listened, his jaw tight. When she finished, he spoke carefully. He told her she was not what they said she was. He told her that running from lies only gave them power. But most importantly, he told her she would not face them alone. She looked at him, confused. She asked what he meant. He took a breath and told her something he had avoided saying before. He told her who he was. He did not boast. He did not list numbers. He simply explained that he owned the building and many others like it, that his name carried weight in places she had never imagined, that he had resources, not just money, but access. She was stunned. The room felt unreal for a moment. She suddenly understood the guards, the respect, the power she had sensed but never questioned. Fear replaced shock. She stepped back, apologizing, saying she hadn't known, that she never meant to overstep. Old habits of self-blame rushed back. He stopped her gently. He told her she had done nothing wrong. He said her story mattered regardless of who he was. That night marked a turning point. He asked her permission before doing anything else. He said he wanted to look deeper into what happened to her, but only if she was ready, would not move forward without her consent. She hesitated for a long time. Trust did not come easily anymore. But she thought about the years lost to silence, about the injustice. about others who might still be suffering. She said yes. From that moment, things began to move. He connected quietly with investigators who specialized in sensitive cases. People who understood how power hid behind belief. They began gathering information slowly, carefully, outdrawing attention. She was asked to share her story again, this time in detail. It was painful, but different. This time she was believed. Every word was written down. Every date mattered. As the investigation deepened, more stories surfaced. People who had been silenced for years found courage in anonymity. The pattern became undeniable. Meanwhile, the church continued as if nothing had ever happened. Services went on. Sermons preached love and purity. No one mentioned the broken lives left behind. She struggled emotionally during this time. Some nights she questioned everything. She feared retaliation. She feared being blamed again. He remained steady, reminding her she could stop at any time. Their connection deepened, but it remained careful. There was affection, but also respect. He did not want her to feel indebted. She did not want to feel rescued. What they shared was built on trust, not power. As weeks turned into months, evidence grew stronger. Documents, testimonies, financial records that didn't add up. He realized the truth would not stay hidden for long, but he also knew that exposing it would come at a cost. For her. It meant reopening wounds in public for him. It meant standing against an institution many people still defended blindly. One quiet night, as the city slept, they stood by the large windows overlooking the lights below. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she asked a question that had been sitting in her heart. She asked why he was doing all this. He answered honestly. He said that wealth had given him comfort but taken away meaning. That her story reminded him that real power should protect, not crush. That staying silent would make him no different from those who watched her suffer and did nothing. She nodded slowly. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from relief. For the first time, she felt something stronger than shame. She felt hope, and somewhere far away, behind locked doors and confident sermons, the foundations of a cruel system had begun to crack. Even though its leaders did not yet realize it, the days that followed were a mixture of cautious excitement and silent fear. She never imagined her life would lead here, to a place where the truth she had kept hidden could finally see the light. Yet, every time she thought about it, a part of her flinched. Fear was a long-time companion, and breaking free from it took more courage than she sometimes believed she had. He continued to move quietly, gathering facts and connecting with people who could help. They did not rush. Every step was deliberate, measured, and careful. They did not want the wrong person alerted too soon. Even small mistakes could give those in power a chance to destroy the evidence or intimidate witnesses. She spent nights reliving her memories, describing the events, the whispers, the sermons, and the cruel punishments she had endured. At first, speaking about it made her cry. Later, it became a shield. Each word she spoke strengthened her, reminding her that she had survived every attack, every whisper, and every betrayal. One afternoon, he came to see her after her shift. There was something in his expression that made her stomach tighten. He handed her a folder. Inside were testimonies from others who had suffered quietly, documents showing patterns of corruption, and records that contradicted the church's public claims. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. These were people who had been silenced for years. Now, they were finally heard. They spent hours together reviewing the materials. She realized the story was much bigger than her own experience. It was about a system that had allowed lies to fester and cruelty to thrive. It was about countless people whose voices had been buried under fear for the first time in years. She felt she was part of something meaningful, not because of fame or power, but because the truth could finally reach the world. And for the first time, she did not feel alone. The next step was the hardest. They had to confront the institution, and confrontation always invited risk. They planned carefully. Lawyers, investigators, and advocates worked behind the scenes to prepare for the moment when the truth would be undeniable. Every piece of evidence had to be verified. Every story had to be corroborated. One misstep could undo everything. Meanwhile, the church continued its routines. Unaware of the storm quietly building against it, services went on. Sermons continued. People attended with blind faith, unaware that the stories they had believed were carefully crafted to protect those in power. She struggled with fear and doubt. Each day she felt the weight of potential consequences. She feared retaliation, public shame, and the backlash from people who still defended the institution. But he reminded her gently but firmly that the truth was stronger than fear. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Then, the day arrived when some of the testimonies could be shared publicly. Carefully, with names changed to protect identities, the stories were published through discreet channels. The response was immediate. Shock, disbelief, and whispers circulated rapidly. People who had once spoken without thought now paused to consider what they had seen. Others who had suffered in silence felt validation for the first time. The church leaders sensed danger, but underestimated the strength of the evidence. They attempted to dismiss the reports as lies, just as they had done in the past. But this time, the stories were not isolated. Patterns were undeniable. Corruption and cruelty could no longer be hidden. She watched the reactions carefully. Some people defended the church, refusing to believe the allegations. Others were horrified, realizing that someone they trusted had taken advantage of faith to harm others. She felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was finally coming out. Sadness for those who would only now understand the pain she and others had endured. He stayed by her side throughout, not as a protector, but as an ally. He did not speak for her. He did not make decisions for her. He reminded her that her voice mattered, that her courage had brought the hidden into the light. Her presence, her testimony, and her willingness to face fear head-on became the heart of the exposure. The days that followed were tense. Meetings, interviews, and discussions unfolded. Journalists contacted them, careful to respect her privacy, but persistent in revealing the truth. Legal teams worked to ensure that no one could silence them. Every step forward was a battle against power, tradition, and disbelief. At night, she would sit by the window in her small apartment, looking at the city lights. Fear was still there, but it no longer dominated her. Courage had begun to take root. She thought of the people who had been silenced, the voices that had been ignored, and the lives that had been damaged. She realized that her pain was now a tool, not a burden. Her story could prevent others from suffering. One afternoon, a senior leader from the church contacted her, demanding a meeting. Their tone was formal, sharp, but underneath it there was fear. They asked to discuss the reports, the allegations, and the witnesses. They tried to intimidate her, but she felt different this time. She had support, evidence, and the courage to stand up. The meeting was tense. The room smelled of polished wood and suppressed authority. She spoke calmly, explaining the events, the pain, and the truth. He remained nearby, observing, ensuring her safety without overshadowing her voice. The leaders tried to dismiss, deflect, and manipulate, but the facts were clear. Witness after witness had corroborated the story. Financial records and internal communications betrayed their hypocrisy. They could not escape the truth. Eventually, the meeting ended. She walked out with a strange sense of triumph. It was not victory over the church or its leaders. It was victory over fear, over silence, over the weight that had once crushed her. She had spoken, been heard, and refused to be silenced again. In the following days, the church faced public scrutiny. People questioned the sermons, the leaders, and the institution itself. Those who had previously followed blindly now demanded answers. The foundations of control began to crumble as transparency and accountability emerged. She continued her life cautiously, aware that not everyone would accept the truth. Some doors remained closed. Some relationships could never be repaired. But she had reclaimed something far more important: her dignity, her voice, and her freedom to choose. He remained a steady presence, neither dominating nor pressuring. They had grown to trust each other, not as savior and victim, but as partners in the pursuit of justice and truth. Their connection deepened, rooted in respect and empathy, a bond that neither of them had anticipated. For her, every day became a lesson in resilience. Every interaction, a reminder that courage could flourish even in the shadow of cruelty. She realized that forgiveness was possible, not for those who harmed her, but for herself. To release the chains of fear that had held her for years, as the church struggled to rebuild its credibility, she found purpose in helping others who had suffered in silence. Her story became a beacon, not for revenge, but for hope. It inspired others to speak, to resist, and to reclaim their voices in the quiet moments. When the city slept and the lights flickered in her small apartment, she reflected on the journey. From shame to fear to courage, every step had been painful, but necessary. She had been broken, judged, and cast aside. Yet she stood taller now than she ever had before. And as the city moved on outside, the church inside faced its reckoning, not through anger or vengeance, but through the power of truth, the courage of the silenced, and the steady guidance of someone who believed in justice over authority. The world had shifted, and she had found her place within it. The city woke slowly one morning, as it always did, with the hum of traffic, the distant sirens, and the chatter of people beginning their day. She sat by the window in her small apartment, a cup of tea warming her hands, and thought about how far she had come. The fear that had once dominated her life now felt distant. It had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer controlled her. The exposure of the church had shaken the town she once called home. People who had followed blindly now questioned, some with regret, others with anger. The leaders had tried to defend themselves, but the evidence, the stories, and the voices of those silenced for years had built an unshakable truth. They could not hide anymore. She had lived through fear and shame, and now she witnessed the consequences of honesty and courage. Her life had changed, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had reclaimed her voice. She realized that her story was more than just her own pain. It was a story that could help others, a story that could prevent others from suffering in silence. Each morning she felt a little stronger, a little more certain that standing up to fear was worth every tear and every sleepless night. He was there. As he had always been, quietly supportive, their relationship had grown slowly, built on trust, respect, and understanding. It was not love born from pity or rescue. It was love born from shared courage and respect for each other's strength. He had shown her that power could be used to protect, not harm, and that wealth was most valuable when it lifted others rather than controlled them. One day, he asked her if she wanted to visit the town she had left behind. She hesitated. Memories of the church, the whispers, and the shame rushed back. She had feared this moment for years, but now, with him by her side, the fear felt different. She realized that facing the past was no longer about punishment or guilt. It was about closure and understanding. When they arrived, the streets seemed smaller than she remembered. The buildings were the same, but the air felt heavier with the echoes of what had happened. People recognized her at first, and some averted their eyes. Others whispered to one another. She held her head high, not out of arrogance, but out of newfound strength. She was no longer the same person who had fled in fear years ago. The church was still there, its doors open, as if nothing had happened. She paused outside, remembering the sermons, the judgment, and the shame. She felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Then she remembered something else: hope. She had survived. She had spoken. She had been heard. Inside, some of the leaders avoided eye contact. Others, younger ones, looked uncertain, realizing that the world outside the church walls had changed. Her presence was a quiet reminder that truth could not be ignored forever. She did not speak loudly or accuse. She simply existed as proof of resilience and courage. He stood beside her, offering silent support. He did not speak for her. He let her voice, her presence, and her dignity do all the work. That was the difference. This was not a show of power. This was a moment of truth. After that visit, she returned to the city feeling lighter than she had in years. She had faced the past, not to reopen wounds, but to close them with courage. The fear that had once held her captive no longer had power over her life. She had learned that facing fear was not weakness, but strength. The church continued to face scrutiny. Investigations revealed more details, and accountability slowly began. Some leaders were replaced. Policies were revised. The town began to change, not overnight, but steadily, guided by the lessons of truth and transparency. She knew that her voice, combined with the voices of others, had played a role in that change. She also discovered a new purpose for her life. She began helping others who had suffered silently, offering guidance, listening, and support. She understood the importance of compassion, patience, and respect. Her story became a beacon for those who had been silenced, showing that courage, even in the darkest moments, could lead to change. He remained a steady presence, not overshadowing her, but walking beside her. Their relationship grew deeper, rooted in trust, shared experiences, and genuine affection. He never sought to control or protect in a way that diminished her independence. Instead, he empowered her, offering the support and respect she deserved in quiet moments. She reflected on her journey, from the shame that had once consumed her, to the fear that had driven her away, to the courage that had returned her voice. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. She understood that true power lay not in wealth or influence, but in the ability to face the truth, speak it, and inspire others to do the same. The city moved on around her, but she felt a sense of calm she had never known. She no longer defined herself by what others had said or done to her. She defined herself by her choices, her courage, and her determination to live honestly and fully. In time, the church rebuilt its reputation, but in a different way. Transparency, accountability, and compassion began to guide it, not fear or judgment. The lessons she had lived through became a quiet influence, shaping the institution in ways that would prevent others from suffering as she had. She learned that true salvation did not come from authority, fear, or punishment. It came from truth, courage, and love. It came from standing up for oneself, speaking out, and refusing to be silenced. It came from the people who supported and believed in her, not because they had to, but because they chose to. One evening, as she watched the city lights twinkle from her window, she felt a deep sense of peace. The shame that had once defined her no longer held power. The fear that had once controlled her no longer dictated her life. And the love and respect she had found reminded her that even in the darkest moments, hope and compassion could prevail. Her life had changed, not because of wealth or power, but because she had chosen to embrace courage over fear, truth over silence, and love over judgment. She had turned shame into strength, pain into purpose, and fear into freedom. And as the night settled over the city, she smiled, knowing that her story, once hidden and silenced, had become a source of light for others. A story that would remind people that even in the face of cruelty, compassion and courage could lead to salvation, not just for one person, but for many. Even after the church's truth had been revealed and her life began to settle, she discovered that real healing was a journey without clear endings. Some nights, when the city was quiet and the streets shimmered with distant lights, memories of the past returned. But instead of overwhelming her, they reminded her of how far she had come. The work she had begun in helping others became her anchor. She met people who had faced judgment, fear, and silence just as she had. She listened to their stories, offering empathy and understanding. She knew the power of being heard. The simple act of listening, giving someone else permission to share their truth, became a quiet revolution in her life. One day, a young woman came to her, trembling with the fear of being judged. She had been shamed publicly for mistakes she did not commit, her reputation twisted by false stories. She was unsure whether anyone would believe her. The woman's eyes were wide, wary, and searching for assurance. She took the young woman's hands in hers and spoke softly, telling her that her story mattered. That courage was not about having power, but about being honest. And that honesty had a ripple effect that could change the world. For hours they spoke, shared, and cried together. By the time the young woman left, she walked taller, carrying hope with her, He watched these interactions with quiet admiration. He had learned that her strength was not in her own survival alone, but in the lives she touched. He realized that her compassion was a reflection of the truth she had fought to reclaim. And he too felt a shift inside him. His wealth and influence, which had once felt like tools of control, now served a deeper purpose: to support change, to give power to the silenced, and to protect the truth. As weeks turned into months, their partnership deepened. They traveled together to meet others affected by similar injustices. They found teachers, business leaders, and ordinary people willing to listen and take action. The quiet work of healing and advocacy became a mission not for fame or recognition, but for human dignity. Yet life was not without challenges. Some days, she faced backlash from those who resisted change. Messages of anger, attempts at intimidation, and whispers of defamation reached her. She felt the old fear return for brief moments. But the difference now was that she had allies, evidence, and the courage to face it. She learned to respond with calm and integrity, not retaliation. Together, they also addressed the emotional toll the journey had taken. She learned mindfulness, ways to rest, and how to find moments of joy amidst the work. He encouraged her to pursue her passions, not just her mission. Small walks, shared meals, and quiet conversations became essential parts of life. They discovered that balance was necessary to sustain courage and hope. One afternoon, they visited a small town similar to the one she had come from, where whispers of fear still controlled lives. They met people hesitant to speak, suspicious of outsiders. But she shared her story, not as a tale of sorrow, but as a lesson in resilience. She spoke of shame transformed into purpose, of fear replaced by courage, and of how truth could heal. The audience listened quietly. Some faces reflected disbelief, others hope. Children listened wide-eyed, sensing the strength and honesty in her voice. She realized that the courage she once feared using was now a beacon for others. Back in the city, she began writing. Her journal, once filled with pain and memory, transformed into essays, articles, and letters meant to inspire. She wrote about fear, courage, healing, and the human capacity to overcome judgment. She shared her reflections on kindness, integrity, and the power of standing by truth. Each word was carefully chosen, carrying her message without anger or accusation, only clarity and hope. Meanwhile, he continued his quiet work of influence. Through meetings, funding, and advocacy, he ensured that systems supported fairness and transparency. He did not act as a savior, but as a partner in progress. Their collaboration showed that change required both courage and resources, heart and strategy. Over time, the church, now under scrutiny, implemented policies to prevent abuse of power. Accountability became more transparent. Leaders faced evaluation and oversight. The community slowly shifted, learning that authority was meaningful only when paired with honesty and compassion. She also found personal joy beyond advocacy. She explored hobbies she had long ignored, cultivated friendships with people she trusted, and allowed herself small moments of happiness without guilt. Her laughter returned more frequently. Her nights of quiet reflection were no longer filled with fear, but with gratitude for the life she had rebuilt. One evening, standing on the balcony of her apartment, she looked at the city lights and reflected on the journey. From the shame that had once silenced her, to the fear that had driven her away, to the courage that had returned her voice. She saw a life reshaped by honesty, resilience, and love. She understood that healing was not a destination, but a continuous process of growth, compassion, and reflection in the months that followed. She and he launched small initiatives to help communities overcome fear and silence. Workshops, support groups, and mentorship programs spread slowly but steadily, impacting lives beyond what either of them had imagined. The quiet influence of truth, courage, and empathy began to ripple outward. She met more people whose lives were still trapped by judgment, but each story strengthened her resolve. She listened without interruption, offered guidance without condescension, and reminded them that change was possible. Each life touched became a small victory, a testament to what one person could do when fear was replaced with courage. Their partnership, grounded in respect and shared purpose, continued to grow. They learned from each other, supported each other, and celebrated the victories, small and large, that came from standing by truth. Their bond was no longer about fear, shame, or survival, but about a shared commitment to make a meaningful difference. Even as new challenges arose, she faced them with a strength she had never known in the small town she had once fled. Fear no longer controlled her choices. Shame no longer dictated her actions. The mistakes and judgments of the past had been transformed into lessons, tools, and sources of empathy. One morning, she received a letter from a young woman in another town. It was brief, but powerful. The young woman thanked her for sharing her story, for giving her the courage to speak up, and for showing that even in the darkest moments, hope and integrity could prevail. Tears filled her eyes as she read the words. She realized that her journey, once consumed by personal suffering, had become a lifeline for others. The city outside her window moved on, but she moved with it in a different way. Every step, every interaction, every word carried the weight of lessons learned and courage reclaimed. She had learned that life was not about avoiding pain, but about facing it, speaking truth, and inspiring others to do the same. As night fell and the light shimmered in the distance, she felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Shame had been transformed into strength. Fear had been replaced by courage. Pain had become purpose. And love, respect, and truth had created a foundation strong enough to sustain her for the rest of her life. Her story, once silenced, had grown beyond her own life. It had touched others, created change, reminded her that even in a world that could be cruel, human compassion and courage could shine brighter than fear. She understood now that true salvation came not from judgment or authority, but from living honestly, acting with integrity, and helping others find their own voices. She smiled, knowing that every step, every struggle, and every moment of doubt had led her here. And as the city lights flickered and the world moved forward, she finally felt free, strong, and hopeful for the future.